Some stories are hard to tell because they cut so deep, but I'll tell you mine. Because maybe you've lived through something like this too, or maybe you'll feel the ache in my words. Before I begin, I want to ask, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? A comment below and let me know. And please, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel Her Revenge Stories. It means the world to me, and it's the only way more people like us can share in these experiences together. My name is Invera Toland, and I'm 72 years old. I never thought I'd be sitting in this recliner, talking. I remember because the leaves outside my little house in Ohio had just turned gold and red, and the air smelled of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. It was one of those mornings when you make a fresh cup of coffee, pull a sweater tight around your shoulders, and tell yourself, this is a good day. But that good day didn't last long. My daughter, Emily, called me. She's my only child. I raised her on my own after my husband passed when she was just 9 years old. I gave everything I had to her. My time, my love, my energy, my savings. I worked nights at the diner, weekends at the grocery store, and even took in mending from the neighbors just so Emily could have school clothes that didn't embarrass her. She was my reason for breathing, my little girl with brown curls and bright eyes that once looked at me like I was her whole world. But somewhere along the way, those eyes stopped seeing me as mom and started seeing me as something else, someone to take from. That morning, her voice on the phone was too sweet. "Hi, Mom," she said, stretching the word out like honey. I should have known. She only called me Mom in that soft voice when she wanted something. "Good morning, Emily," I said, sipping my coffee. "How are the kids?" "They're fine, Mom," she answered quickly. Too quickly. She didn't want to talk about them. She wanted to talk about me, or rather, my money. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach before she even asked. "Listen, Mom," she began. "Things have been really tight around here. The bills are piling up, and John's hours got cut at work. We just don't know what we're going to do. I was hoping maybe you could help us out again." Again. That word stung. I had helped her out so many times before, paying her rent, covering her car insurance, even sending money for her credit card bills. My Social Security check wasn't much, but I managed because I believed helping your children was just what you did. I never wanted her or my grandkids to struggle. But this time, something inside me hesitated. I thought of the envelope of savings I kept tucked away in my bedroom closet, money I'd carefully put aside from years of scrimping and saving. That money wasn't for luxuries, it was for my future, my security, maybe even the day when I could no longer live alone and needed help. It was the safety net I had built stitch by stitch, penny by penny. "Emily," I said softly, "I can't keep giving like this. I need to make sure I have enough for myself. You know I don't have much." There was silence on the other end, then a sharp sigh. "Oh, come on, Mom," she snapped, the sweetness gone from her voice. "You've got money stashed away. Don't act like you don't. You're not going to live forever, you know. What good is it sitting there when I'm drowning?" Her words hit me like a slap. Not going to live forever. As if my only purpose was to hand her whatever scraps I had left until I died. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I held the phone. "Emily," I whispered, "that money is for my future. For when I can't take care of myself anymore. It's not just sitting there. It's my security." She laughed. A cold, sharp laugh that made me shiver. "Security? Mom, your security is me. Who else is going to look after you? The least you could do is help me now when I need it." I didn't argue. I just ended the call, tears burning in my eyes. I sat in my kitchen staring at the steam rising from my coffee, wondering how my little girl had turned into this woman who saw me as nothing more than a wallet. The day went on slowly after that. I tried to distract myself by baking, something I always loved. I pulled out flour and sugar, cracked eggs into a bowl, and let the rhythm of mixing soothe me. I was making apple pie, the way my mother taught me, with a lattice crust and a sprinkle of cinnamon sugar on top. Baking has a way of carrying me back to better days, when Emily was small and would sit on the counter swinging her legs, begging to lick the spoon. But halfway through, I heard a noise. A click at the back door. I froze, the wooden spoon in my hand dripping batter onto the floor. I hadn't invited anyone over. Mom, a voice called, casual as if she owned the place. Emily. She walked in like she always did, no knocking, no asking. Just barged in. Her hair was pulled up in a messy bun, and she carried a tote bag slung over her shoulder. She smiled too wide, but it wasn't a warm smile. "What are you doing here, Emily?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, just thought I'd visit," she said breezily, looking around the kitchen. Smells good. Apple pie." "Yes," I said quietly, watching her. Something felt off. Her eyes kept darting toward the hallway, toward my bedroom. We sat for a few minutes, but she was restless, fidgeting in her chair, glancing at her phone, then at the clock. Finally, she stood. "I need to use the bathroom," she said, already heading down the hall. My heart thudded in my chest. The bathroom wasn't that way, my bedroom was. I wiped my hands on my apron and followed quietly. When I reached the doorway, I froze. She was in my room, standing in front of the closet, her hand already reaching for the shoebox where I kept my savings. "Emily," I shouted, my voice breaking. She jumped but didn't stop. She yanked the box down, spilling envelopes across the bed. Cash fluttered onto the quilt I had stitched years ago, the one she used to snuggle under as a little girl. "Stop," I cried, rushing toward her. "That's my money." She turned to me, eyes blazing. "It's my money now," she spat, grabbing fistfuls of bills. "You don't need it, Mom. You'll be fine." I grabbed her arm, desperate, but she shook me off so hard I stumbled back. And then she laughed. A cruel, heartless laugh. "You're pathetic," she said, stuffing the cash into her tote bag. "You think this little stash is going to save you? You're old, Mom. You can't even stop me." Tears blurred my vision. I stood there shaking, helpless, as my own daughter stole the savings I had worked decades for. When she left, slamming the door behind her, the house felt colder than it ever had. I sank onto the edge of my bed, clutching the empty shoebox, and for the first time in my life, I wished I hadn't raised her alone. Maybe if her father had been here, she wouldn't have turned out this way. But as I sat there, something hardened inside me. I wiped my tears, stood up, and looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection showed an old woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but beneath that, I saw steel. She thought I was weak. She thought she could take everything from me and laugh about it. But she was wrong. She had no idea what I was capable of. And that's when I made the call. I stood there for a long time after she left, the shoebox still in my hands, the quilt on the bed littered with scraps of paper and dust where the envelopes had torn. It was as though the years of sacrifice, the long nights and aching feet, the little economies I'd made, all of it, had been scooped up and shoved into that tote bag. I wanted to collapse. But instead, I picked up the phone. My hands shook as I dialed. The number I pressed wasn't one I had used much in my life, but at that moment, it felt like the only choice I had left. "Sheriff's office," came the calm voice on the other end. I cleared my throat, trying to steady it. "My name is Invera Toland. I need to report a theft." Even saying the words out loud felt like acid in my mouth. My daughter. My only daughter. And here I was, reporting her like she was some stranger off the street. But she had left me no choice. The dispatcher asked me the usual questions: what was taken, who did it, when it happened. I answered quietly, my voice flat, but every word cracked another piece off the picture of the life I thought I had. "How much was taken, ma'am?" I swallowed. "About $22,000. There was a pause on the other end. "And you said your daughter took it?" "Yes." It sounded unreal, even to me, but it was the truth. The dispatcher told me an officer would be by shortly. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the kitchen again, the smell of apple pie still in the air. I hadn't even finished making it. The dough sat half-rolled on the counter, the apples browning in the bowl. A pie meant to bring sweetness had turned into the backdrop for one of the bitterest days of my life. When the knock finally came, I opened the door to see a deputy standing there, his hat in his hands, his face polite but cautious. He introduced himself as Deputy Carlson. He was young, probably not much older than Emily, with kind eyes that seemed to search mine as if trying to measure just how deep this wound went. "Mrs. Toland," he said softly, "may I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside. He sat at my kitchen table, notebook open, pen poised. I told him everything. The call that morning, her visit, the way she had gone straight to my bedroom, the laughter as she stuffed my savings into her bag. I even showed him the empty shoebox. He listened carefully, jotting things down, nodding now and then. When I finished, he sat back and let out a slow breath.
"I'm sorry, Mum."
That must have been very difficult. I looked at him with tears in my eyes. "She's my daughter. My only daughter. Do you understand?" I never thought. My words trailed off. He nodded. "I do, Mrs. Toland. But theft is theft, no matter who does it. You've done the right thing calling us. It's not just about the money, it's about what she did to you. We'll handle this." His voice was steady, but I felt the heaviness of it. Nothing could undo the fact that my daughter had chosen greed over love. Still, hearing someone else say I was right gave me a small thread of strength to cling to. After he left, promising that someone would be in touch soon, I sat down with a slice of the pie I had finally baked. It was too sweet, almost sickly. I pushed it away after a few bites. The hours crept by. I kept expecting Emily to call, maybe even to show up at my door again, smirking and unapologetic. But she didn't. Instead, "Would you be willing to come down to the station tomorrow to make a formal statement?" I hesitated, clutching the receiver. Tomorrow. That word meant it wasn't over yet. I had stepped into something that would ripple through every corner of my life. But I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yes," I said softly. After I hung up, I sat back in the recliner and closed my eyes. The house was quiet, too quiet. I thought back to years ago, when Emily was small, when the house was filled with her laughter. She used to run through these very rooms with her dolls, climb onto my lap, and tell me she'd never leave me. How do you reconcile that memory with the woman who had just stolen your life savings? I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying her laughter, sharp and cruel, echoing through my bedroom as she took what wasn't hers. Every time I drifted off, I jolted awake again, heart racing. The next morning, I dressed carefully, smoothing down my best blouse and pulling a cardigan around my shoulders. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. If I was going to face what came next, I needed to look steady, even if my insides trembled. At the sheriff's station, I sat in a small room with beige walls and a table too big for the space. Deputy Carlson was there again, his notepad ready. He asked me to tell the story once more, every detail I could remember. It was harder the second time, the words cutting deeper as I spoke them out loud again. But I managed. When I finished, he nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Toland. We'll be filing charges today. Your daughter will be brought in for questioning. You may have to testify if it comes to that."
Testify?
Against my own flesh and blood. The thought made my stomach churn. But then I pictured that empty shoebox, the way she had ripped open those envelopes with no hesitation, no thought of me at all. And I knew I couldn't back down. I left the station feeling heavier than when I went in. The autumn sun was bright, the air crisp, but it all felt distant. I drove home slowly, the world around me a blur. Back at the house, I made tea and sat at the kitchen table. I kept glancing at the phone, half hoping, half dreading it would ring. And then it did. "Mom." It was Emily. Her voice was sharp, defensive. "What did you do?" "The sheriff came to the house. Do you have any idea what you've started?" I gripped the phone tight. "You stole from me, Emily. You didn't leave me a choice." "Oh, don't play the victim," she snapped. "It was just money. You've got plenty. And now you're trying to ruin my life over it? Do you know what this will do to me? To the kids?" Her words cut, but I stayed firm. "You already ruined it, Emily. You ruined it the moment you laughed at me while you emptied my savings." There was silence on the line, then a low growl of anger. "You're going to regret this, Mom. You'll see." The call ended with a click. I sat there shaking, tears running down my cheeks, but also something else, a strange calm. Because for once, I hadn't folded. For once, I had stood my ground. That evening, as the sun dipped low, there was another knock at the door. I opened it to see two deputies standing there, serious-faced. "Mrs. Toland," one said, "we wanted to inform you personally. Your daughter has been taken into custody. She'll be processed tonight. You'll be kept updated on the case." I nodded slowly, my heart a whirlwind of grief and grim relief. After they left, I closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a long breath. For the first time since it happened, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected. Not happiness, not even victory, but a sense that maybe, just maybe, justice was finally at my door. The sound of that door closing echoed through the quiet house, and I stood there for a long while, pressing my hand flat against the wood. My chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. I thought about how different knocks had sounded on that same door over the years. Emily rushing in from school, arms full of books. Neighbors dropping by with a pie or a casserole. Even the preacher once, to check on me after my husband died. But this time, it was deputies, bringing word that my own daughter was in custody. I turned away and shuffled back to the kitchen. The kettle still sat on the stove from earlier, lukewarm now. I reheated it and poured myself another cup of tea, my hands wrapped tightly around the mug. It felt good just to hold something warm, something steady. The evening stretched before me, long and uneasy. I sat in my recliner, staring at the pictures on the wall. There was one of Emily when she was about 6 years old, missing front teeth, wearing her favorite overalls, a smudge of chocolate on her cheek. She had been laughing, clutching a teddy bear I'd sewn from scraps of fabric. That little girl seemed a lifetime away, and yet she looked at me from the frame as if asking, "What happened to us, Mama?" I tried to keep busy, folding laundry, tidying up, wiping down counters that didn't need wiping. But the silence of the house pressed in on me. I knew that by tomorrow, the news would travel through town. People always talked, and in small places like ours, nothing stayed secret for long. My neighbors would hear. The church ladies would whisper. And I would be known as the woman who called the law on her own daughter. But then I thought, what choice had I been given? If I had stayed silent, Emily would have walked away with my future in her bag, and she would have learned that she could do it again and again, without consequence. Maybe this was the only way left to show her that there were lines even between family that you couldn't cross. The phone rang again just as I was settling into my chair. I braced myself before answering, expecting Emily's voice dripping with venom. But instead, it was a different one.
Softer.
"Grandma?" It was Lily, my eldest granddaughter. My throat tightened. "Lily," I whispered. "Is it true?" she asked in a trembling voice. Mom said you called the sheriff on her." I sank into the chair, clutching the receiver. "Lily, your mother took something very important from me. I didn't have a choice." There was silence on the line, then a sniffle. "She said you're trying to ruin her life." Tears burned in my eyes. "Sweetheart, I would never want to ruin her life. Or yours. But what she did was wrong. And sometimes when people do wrong, there are consequences, even if they're family." Lily didn't answer for a long moment. Then, in a small voice, she said, "I still love you, Grandma." The line clicked, and she was gone. I held the phone against my chest, rocking gently, the tears slipping free. It was one thing to face my daughter's anger. It was another to hear the confusion in my granddaughter's voice, to feel the crack in the bond between us. The night wore on. I barely slept, turning over in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the house felt louder than usual, and my thoughts wouldn't quiet down. By the time dawn came, pale light spilling across the quilt, I felt hollowed out. I made myself breakfast, just toast and eggs, and tried to eat, but the food sat heavy in my stomach. At mid-morning, the phone rang again. This time, it was Deputy Carlson. "Mrs. Toland," he said, "I wanted to update you. Your daughter was processed last night and released this morning on her own recognizance. She'll have to appear in court in 2 weeks. Until then, there's to be no contact between you unless approved by the court." The words felt both like a relief and a blow. Relief, because it meant she couldn't storm into my house again. A blow, because it meant the wall between us was now official, sanctioned by the law. "Thank you," I said quietly. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my hands. They were wrinkled now, the veins standing out like rivers on a map. These hands had once braided Emily's hair, tied her shoes, held her close after nightmares. And now they had signed a statement against her. I thought about forgiveness. The church always preached it. Forgive 70 times 7. Turn the other cheek. But forgiveness didn't mean— "John," I said warily. "Invera," he muttered, nodding. His face was tired, the lines deeper than I remembered. "Can we talk?" I hesitated. "She never does." Hearing that hurt in his voice, I felt a pang of sorrow. Not just for myself, but for him, too, for the man caught between a wife's choices and the fallout they left behind. "She'll hate me for this," I whispered. "Maybe," he admitted. "But maybe it's what she needs to finally wake up." We sat in silence for a while after that, the ticking of the kitchen clock loud between us. Eventually he stood. "I'll keep the kids away from this mess as best I can," he said quietly. "They don't need to see their mother and grandmother at war." I nodded, grateful, though my heart ached at the thought of missing their faces. When he left, the house seemed— By late afternoon, I was dozing lightly in the chair when I heard another vehicle pull into the driveway. My pulse quickened again. But this time it wasn't John. It was a sheriff's car. The deputy stepped out, walked up to the porch, and tipped his hat. "Evening, Mrs. Toland," he said gently. "I just wanted to check on you, make sure you're all right. These things can be hard." I nodded, swallowing past the lump in my throat. "I'll manage," I said softly. He gave me a kind smile. That's what I thought. When he left, the last of the sunlight was fading. I went inside, locking the door behind me, and stood in the quiet house once more. My savings were gone. My daughter was furious, and the path ahead looked uncertain. But as I drew the curtains and turned on the lamp, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't pretending everything was fine. I had taken a stand. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Strength. That night stretched long. The kind of night where the shadows seemed to move on their own, and the silence hummed louder than any clock. I sat up in bed with the lamp on, a book in my lap that I never really read. The words blurred, my mind too tangled to focus. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's face at the door, mocking, cold, then twisting in shock when the deputies appeared. That image haunted me as much as the memory of her laughter while she stuffed my savings into her purse. I rose before the sun, moving through the house quietly. Old habits die hard. I brewed coffee instead of tea, the bitter smell filling the kitchen. The house creaked as if it too had woken reluctantly. I carried my mug to the front porch and sat wrapped in my shawl, watching the horizon glow faintly pink. For the first time in years, I thought not about what had been lost, but what could still be salvaged. The phone rang around 7. My heart lurched, fearing it was Emily, but it was Ruth, my neighbor and oldest friend. "Invera," she said, her voice steady as always, "I heard something last night. Folks are saying Emily was taken in." I closed my eyes. "It's true." "Oh, honey," Ruth sighed. "I know that wasn't easy." "I didn't want to," I said, my throat tight. "But she left me no choice." "Sometimes the hardest thing is the right thing," Ruth replied. "Don't you forget that." We talked for a while, Ruth offering gentle words, weaving comfort through the phone line. When I hung up, I felt a little lighter. The burden of secrecy had weighed heavy, but now at least someone else knew. Someone who didn't judge me for it. I decided I couldn't sit in the house all day. After tidying up, I pulled on my sweater and walked into town. The sidewalks were quiet, only a few folks out sweeping porches or heading to the diner. As I passed, I caught glances, some curious, some sympathetic. The story had already spread, just as I knew it would. At the corner cafe, I pushed open the door, and the bell jingled. The warmth of coffee and bacon greeted me. I chose a small booth near the window. "Morning, Invera," the waitress said kindly. "Morning," I replied, managing a small smile. I ordered oatmeal and sat watching the street outside, the familiar storefronts, the same old trees lining the road. Everything looked unchanged, but I felt like I was walking through a different world than yesterday. Halfway through my meal, a voice interrupted. "Mind if I sit?" It was Pastor Miller, a kind man with graying hair and eyes that always seemed to look right through you. "Of course," I said softly. He sat down, folding his hands. "I heard about Emily," he said gently. I nodded, staring into my oatmeal. "You know," he continued, "forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone hurt you. It means setting yourself free from carrying the weight of bitterness." "I don't feel bitter," I whispered. "I feel tired."
Sut.
"I never thought my daughter would do this." His eyes softened. "Sometimes love looks like protection. Protecting yourself, even if it means drawing a hard line. That doesn't mean you stop loving her." His words sank into me, a quiet balm. I thanked him before he left, and for the first time since everything happened, I felt maybe God hadn't abandoned me in this mess. I stayed at the cafe a while longer, sipping coffee, until I saw the sheriff's car drive past slowly. My stomach clenched. The sight was a reminder. Emily was out, and the distance between us was enforced not by choice, but by law. On the way home, I stopped at the post office. A letter waited in my box. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It was from Emily. The words were scrawled angrily uneven.
How could you do this to me?
"You're my mother. You ruined everything. I'll never forgive you. You'll die alone in that old house, and I won't be there to bury you." The paper blurred as my eyes filled with tears. My knees weakened, and I leaned against the counter until the wave passed. Slowly, I folded the letter and tucked it into my bag. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter. Part of me wanted to rip it up, to erase the venom. But another part of me couldn't. This, too, was part of our story now. A terrible chapter, but still ours. The hours crept by. I cleaned the house again, though it was spotless already. I watered the plants, ironed laundry. Anything to keep from sinking into the chair and staring at nothing. By late afternoon, the phone rang again. This time, it was Lily. "Grandma," she said softly, "Mom's really mad. But I wanted you to know, I understand. I don't like what she did. I don't think it's fair. I don't know what to do." Tears welled in my eyes again. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't have to do anything. Just know that I love you. Always." Her voice cracked. "I love you too." We didn't talk long, but that call lifted something heavy for me. Maybe, just maybe, the bridge between me and my grandchildren could still hold, even if the one with Emily was in ruins. As dusk settled, I sat on the porch again. The cicadas buzzed, the air cooling as night crept in. I thought of the savings I'd lost, the security that had vanished in a moment of betrayal. But I also thought of the sheriff's knock, the pastor's words, Ruth's call, and Lily's voice. Maybe I had lost money, maybe I had lost Emily for now, but I had not lost everything. The stars blinked above as the night deepened, and I pulled the shawl tighter around my shoulders. Somewhere in the dark, I found a sliver of peace. The next morning came softly, with a pale light spilling through the curtains. I hadn't slept much, but I rose anyway, pulling myself from bed with the stiffness that always seemed sharper after restless nights. My feet found the familiar floorboards, the grooves worn into the wood after decades of living in this house. I brewed tea this time, craving the gentleness of it after yesterday's harsh coffee. I sat at the table, hands cradling the mug, listening to the world outside. Birds chattered in the yard, and somewhere down the road, a truck rumbled past. Life went on, as it always did, even when everything inside felt shaken. After breakfast, I decided to visit the bank. Not because I had money left to manage. Emily had seen to that, but because I needed to face the emptiness squarely. Avoiding it would only give it more power. I put on my navy coat, the one I'd had for years, and walked into town. The bank teller, a young woman with bright eyes, gave me a polite smile. "Morning, Mrs. Toland. How can I help you today?" I leaned on the counter, studying myself. "I'd like to review my account." She tapped at her keyboard, her brow furrowing slightly before she turned the screen toward me. The numbers were, as I already knew, nearly nothing left. But seeing it in black and white was different. My breath caught and I felt my knees weaken. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "Yes," I whispered, though it wasn't true. "Yes, I just needed to see it." I left with a printed statement tucked into my purse. Each step back down the street felt heavy, but also deliberate. Knowing the truth, carrying the paper proof, was strangely grounding. At the grocery store, I picked up a few essentials: milk, bread, a bag of apples. I lingered in the aisles, partly to avoid heading home to silence. A few people nodded politely as they passed, but I caught the glances, the whispers. Word about Emily's arrest had spread quickly. By the time I returned home, the afternoon sun was slanting low. I unpacked my groceries slowly, putting each item in its place. The sound of the refrigerator door closing echoed too loudly in the quiet kitchen. The phone rang just as I sat down. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself. It was John again. "Invera," he said, his voice tired. "I wanted to tell you, I filed the paperwork today. I'm leaving Emily." I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. "I can't keep covering for her," he went on. "The debts, the lies, and now this. It's not just about the money, it's about who she's become. I can't let the kids grow up thinking this is normal." My heart ached. "John, I'm so sorry." He exhaled heavily. "Don't be. Maybe it's long overdue. I should have seen it sooner. But I want you to know, I'll make sure the children know the truth. They'll know their grandmother isn't the villain in all this." Tears slipped down my cheeks. "Thank you. That means more than you know." After we hung up, I sat for a long time staring at the wall. Part of me grieved, not just for the marriage ending, but for the family unraveling. Yet another part of me felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the children would be spared from walking the same path their mother had taken. As the hours passed, I found myself restless. I walked the yard, trimming dead blooms from the garden, sweeping leaves from the porch. The motion soothed me, though my thoughts kept circling. What would happen at the court date? Would Emily stand there glaring, spitting venom at me? Would the judge believe my story? Or would Emily twist it into something else? The weight of it all pressed harder as the sun sank. I lit a lamp in the living room and settled into my chair, staring at the framed photos on the mantel. My husband, gone these many years, smiled back at me. Our wedding picture, black and white, his arm tight around my shoulders. My throat tightened. "Oh, Harold," I whispered into the empty room. "I wish you were here. You'd know what to do." The house answered only with silence. Later that evening, I heard a car outside. My heart leapt, panic rising. I went to the window, peering through the curtain. A figure stood by the driveway, Lily. I hurried to the door and opened it. She rushed forward, throwing her arms around me. "Grandma," she whispered. My arms wrapped around her tightly, my tears wetting her hair. "Oh, sweetheart, what are you doing here?" "I couldn't stay at home," she said, her voice muffled. "Mom's so angry. She keeps saying terrible things about you. But I know she's wrong. I needed to see you." I drew her inside, shutting the door behind us. We sat at the kitchen table, and I studied her face. She was 15 now, on the cusp of womanhood, her eyes wise beyond her years. "Your mother loves you," I said gently, though my voice trembled. "Even if she's lost her way." Lily shook her head fiercely. "She doesn't act like she loves anyone. She only cares about herself. I don't want to be like her." My heart cracked and swelled at once. "You won't be. You're strong, Lily. And kind. Those are the things that matter." She stayed with me for a while, sipping tea, talking quietly. When John came later to pick her up, his eyes met mine with gratitude. "Thank you for letting her come," he said softly. "Always," I replied. After they left, The house fell silent again, but this time the silence didn't feel so heavy. Lily's visit had left a warmth in the air, like a candle burning even after being blown out. As I prepared for bed, I stood at the window, looking out into the dark yard. The sheriff's words from the other night echoed in my head, that these things were hard. They were, but they were also necessary. I drew the curtains closed and lay down, pulling the quilt to my chin. For the first time in a long while, I whispered a prayer not just for myself, but for Emily too. That somehow, somewhere in the storm she had created, she might find her way back. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deeper than before. The day of Emily's court hearing dawned gray and heavy, the sky low with clouds that looked ready to break open. I woke early, not because I wanted to, but because my nerves wouldn't let me stay in bed. My stomach churned as I dressed carefully in my best Sunday clothes, the navy dress I always wore for. She walked in, her chin high, her eyes burning. For a moment, our gazes met, and I saw not the little girl with the teddy bear, not the teenager with dreams in her eyes, but a hardened woman convinced she'd been wronged. The proceedings moved in a blur. Words about theft, savings, betrayal. My voice shook when I testified, but I spoke the truth. I told the judge about the day when the gavel fell. Emily turned her eyes toward me, full of fury. She mouthed words I couldn't hear, but I knew they weren't kind. Still, I didn't flinch. For the first time, I felt the ground steady beneath me. Afterward, John guided me outside. The air was cool, a light drizzle falling. We stood on the courthouse steps, and I breathed deeply. It was over, at least this part. The fight had been fought, the truth spoken aloud in front of others who had listened. John placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Invera." I nodded, tears mixing with the rain. I hope one day she sees that. We drove home in silence, the wipers swishing back and forth. When he dropped me off, Lily leaned from the passenger seat and waved. Her smile, small but genuine, warmed me. I waved back, my heart lighter for it. Back inside my quiet house, I slipped off my damp coat and set it on the hook. I moved through the room slowly, touching the furniture, the framed photos, the walls that had seen so much life. The ache of loss was still there, my savings, my daughter's love, but it was no longer unbearable. As the afternoon passed, I brewed tea and sat by the window, watching the rain ease into a drizzle. I thought about what forgiveness really meant. Not forgetting, not excusing, but choosing not to let the wound rot inside you. Maybe I couldn't forgive Emily today, not fully, but I could take one small step toward it, if only for myself. The phone rang once more. It was Ruth. "I heard how it went," she said gently. The air smelled fresh after the rain. Across the yard, the trees stood dark and solid, their leaves glistening. I thought of Harold again. "Well, my love," I whispered. "I made it through. Not the way I wanted, but the way I had to." The night answered with stillness, broken only by the sound of crickets. Later, I sat in my chair, knitting in my lap though I barely moved the needles. My thoughts drifted to Lily and the other grandchildren. They were my hope now, the thread connecting past to future. I prayed they would grow with kindness, with strength, with the wisdom to choose better than Emily had. By the time I readied for bed, the house no longer felt as heavy. The ache lingered, but so did something else. Peace, fragile but real. I lay down, pulling the quilt tight, and closed my eyes. That day had taken so much from me, but it had also given something back. It had given me my voice, my strength, my right to stand tall even when it hurt. As I drifted into sleep, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Life rarely tied things in neat bows. Emily's anger might burn for years. The distance between us might never close. But I also knew I had chosen the only path left to me, and I had walked it with as much grace as I could. And that, I thought, would have to be enough.